how can we balance sufficient density and still preserve architectural heritage, especially in downtown districts of these modern megacities that expand so rapidly?
You know, when we think about how the modern city is starting to evolve, we look at the issue of density versus heritage. I think Shanghai is actually a great example. And we've been working here in China since 2006 as a company. And one of the things that we've noticed and we've commented on in our projects here is there's actually some great areas to learn from. The Bund, the French concession, that have this very rich heritage and also have great density. When we look at some of the things that have gone on in, say, Lujiazui or Pudong, we've actually talked to city planning about this and said, what drove you to the model that we see that has been built here? Because in some ways, it's lost a bit of richness that we see in the more heritage areas of Shanghai. You know, when you drive around the French concession at night, particularly in the summer, and you have this scale, this fabric with the tree canopy, and it's got a certain charm to it. You can also realize there's a great density that's been built in a place like the French concession. Similarly, in the Bund, if you walk around the Bund, you realize there's incredible density that exists here in Shanghai. There's some real lessons that can be learned. We've also looked at some things with designers here like Gensler who have studied this issue across the world and did some incredibly compelling diagrams that looked at urban density, comparing places like Houston to Paris, to New York, to Shanghai, and other places in China. And you can see there's many models that can lead to density. It doesn't just have to be solely about tall buildings. There's plenty of places that are dense that don't have to have 500-meter tall buildings.
Well, it's not just about tall buildings, but we want to ask at least one question about specifically tall buildings and ask you to predict where or how tall, what height, how many floors, however you want to slice it, the tallest building in the world will be in 2050 and why.
You know, our time here in China, I got to speak to the people that are leading the Kingdom Tower effort in Jeddah. And, you know, at least in my mind, it's hard to think that we're going to go much higher than 1,000 meters tall. I think the reasons for that are primarily technical, more than anything else. At a certain point, I think we do begin to face limitations in terms of vertical transportation and dealing with other systems that go in tall buildings. So I think in 2050, I think Kingdom Tower is still going to be the champ.
Yeah, I've heard that answer, and I like that one. I've heard it's interesting, the diversity of answers we've heard on this.
Right.
What kinds of obligations do you think a developer has, or do you think a developer has any obligation to create affordable housing or to ensure a social housing in high rises?
You know, I think prior to my time here in China, I looked after our design and construction activities in San Francisco. And I actually think the San Francisco model for bringing the responsibility related to affordable housing into the dialogue for new development is correct. Now, San Francisco's model is interesting in that it allows developers optionality in terms of taking that affordable housing off-site. Now, there's some criticism that comes with that. You're saying, oh, are we creating elitist areas related to affordable housing? But in reality, the prototypes that maybe work best for affordable housing actually may not always belong in a high-rise building. We've seen that there's been great success in partnering with communities who want to retain the fabric of a community and build a different product that is maybe more low-rise or mid-rise that actually works with what they feel the needs of their community. You know, we just heard Anthony talk about, well, I live in Oak Park, Illinois, in a house because of certain other infrastructure and kind of structural shaping of the neighborhood. A high-rise may actually not be the right solution in all cases for affordable housing. I think it varies, but I think San Francisco's got a good model in that it links affordable housing to development rights.
Mm-hmm.
You can't divorce the two. They're linked from day one. So that responsibility that the developer has is there and known, and it's not something you can really get around.
It's not an afterthought, basically.
It's not an afterthought. It's part of the process. It's part of the dialogue. When you go to present your scheme, your beautiful architectural drawings of this high-rise project, you equally have to present what are you going to do for the architecture of your affordable housing project.
Mm. Do you think there's any value in a mixed income community inherently?
You know, I think it ends up being a question of, is that what the community wants? You know, in some ways, I think a marketing person may say, ooh, that mix may not be good. But I think the community is what ends up deciding, how does that mix really work?
Mm-hmm.
You know, developers can certainly do their part in providing a wider range of units within a project to hit different price points. And, you know, it gets to be a little bit of a touchy question because, again, is there a class structure being created in how big units are or the finishes you put in units? Tough one to answer.
Right.
Yeah?
Right, because you do have to develop differently. I mean, just economically speaking, but
That's right.
what goes beyond the pale?
That's right.
Yeah.
So you've got to be conscious of how does this thing work from a financial equation point of view. How do you get your price point right so that you could actually appeal to different layers within a society?
So, since getting your degree from IIT in '82,
Right.
is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
You've worked in cities all over the world, and now you live in Shanghai the last 4 years.
Right.
Is there a lesson you've learned that applies everywhere, or has your experience just shown to you that indeed every individual city is different?
You know, I think I've been really blessed in my career. I've had the chance to move around. I started really going to school in Chicago in 1977. I began working really in the real estate industry in 1979, and Chicago took me to many places. I've lived and worked in New York and London, Kuala Lumpur, Las Vegas, Houston, San Francisco, and now I find myself here in Shanghai. And people have asked me this question before.
Mm-hmm.
What do you see? Is there a commonality of experience? And at the end of the day, I tell people it ends up being about the people. It ends up, the process of building is an intensely human experience. And when you move around the world, you actually see the universality of that. Everyone builds. Everyone knows that to build cities or build buildings, you've got to get thousands of people to come together to work as this efficient ant farm, to build this thing that we're going to live in, use, you know, buy things in. So I see more the commonality than the differences, and it comes down to the people, interacting with people. How do you communicate with people? How do you establish this goal that people are going to spend years of their lives moving to accomplish? So that's kind of the universal experience that I draw from having lived and worked around the world.
Tell us about your work in Shanghai today. Where are your frontiers? What are you interested in doing, and what are you involved in at the moment? Share any news with us.
Well, you know, our activities here in Shanghai in China, I think, have been fairly interesting for us as a company. We're known primarily as an office building developer in other parts of the world. You know, we develop in the U.S. and in Europe, in Brazil, in India, and here in China. We find that our experience here in China, because of how China has set up its land use kind of game, it forces developers to take a piece of land that has pretty tightly and prescriptive definitions of how that land is to be used from an overall urban planning sense. So in some ways, you're given tough constraints going in, but we see that the constraints can be an opportunity in terms of what are we going to turn that into. I'd say our biggest disappointment working here is that the the residential work that we're doing in China tends to be pretty formulaic. Why? It's because that's how the Chinese building codes and market are set up. You have to conform to certain rules and regulations in terms of building residential units that are south-facing, have cross ventilation, that are good and sound basic building blocks to work from, but it takes away kind of certain pieces of your arsenal that you can use for expression, say in New York or in San Francisco. Things you could do there that may be more about views you can't really do here in Shanghai. So it's a challenge. When we think about our office space and the office product we're developing here, we're actually seeing that there's starting to be a commonality with trends that are developing in other places of the world. We think the workplace is really changing. As we've heard in the conference, the millennial generation is going to take over soon, and they actually have a different idea about how life works, about what work means in comparison to the rest of your life. And there's a blending that we're having to acknowledge and actually reflect in how we think about our office buildings.
How is that influencing how you think about office
So
buildings?
it's we're seeing that office space is really changing into something that is just, it's not somewhere you just go and spend 8 hours at. It may be a place that, you know, like we've heard, the Google experience, people living on the Google campus for weeks or months at a time. But we find that very often work hours are flexible. People may work kind of casually during the day and go off and do other things that interest them during the day. So we see that there's a lot more like an amenity base that we have to build into our office space. And we also have to create a variety of different experiences for people to have during the day. People want to get outside. They want to go sit on a terrace. They want to go find their coffee shop to go have a coffee and sit with colleagues. They want to have a variety of different work experiences where they may wanting to be work quietly by themselves, but they may want to have an intense kind of teaming session with a bunch of other colleagues.
Sure.
So that actually changes a bit of the traditional perimeter office or cubicle approach to office spaces. We're creating far more flexible spaces, far more open spaces, and with greater variety.
Do you think tall buildings currently provide that variety of experiences? Seems to make sense for a campus model, but when you build up, is it more difficult?
I think what we're seeing is the typology is changing. So increasingly, even in buildings that are purely office buildings, we're seeing the introduction of that notion of variety. How can we create terraces? How can we create like a lobby floor that is up in the air that is used as a communal spot? How can you create a space that is flexible, that could be used for conferencing, but it may be used for pizza and beer at night at the end of the day, where people are just going to hang out and talk and relax and maybe get a different experience out of their workday.
Flexible spaces.
That's right.
How about weaving public space throughout the height of a tall building?
I think it's a great challenge for many of us to think about that. I think particularly for many Americans in kind of the post 9/11 world, fear and security kind of have been linked together in how buildings are thought about and used. What's been interesting when you come into many places in China and other locations around the world, if you take that equation of fear out of it, then the notion of the permeability of buildings and bringing the public is something that is being talked about and is actually being manifested here. Here in Shanghai, the Shanghai Tower, I think, is going to be one of the great urban experience of a tall building that is going to attempt to really bring the public vertically up into the building.